Ethan Brooks had seen fire swallow buildings. He had watched smoke steal the breath from good men, and he had held the hands of people in their final moments. But nothing had prepared him for what he saw that morning. The sun was just beginning to crest over the pine-covered hills around Grace Hill, painting his land in strokes of gold and shadow. Ethan stepped out of his farmhouse, coffee mug in hand, steam rising into the crisp mountain air. It was supposed to be an ordinary morning. Halfway through his routine, he heard it, a rustle beyond the barn. Too quiet to be the wind, too deliberate to be just wildlife. He rounded the corner, and his heart nearly stopped. There, in the middle of the training yard, stood an 8-year-old girl. Tiny, fragile, like a doll lost in a field of giants. And surrounding her, in a perfect circle, were all 14 of his German shepherds. Muscular, trained, alert. He had worked them every day for years, but even Ethan had never seen them like this. Silent, watching. Grace, he whispered. The name caught in his throat. Half a prayer, half a curse. The girl didn't move. Only her hand, rising slowly, fingers stretched toward the sky. Ethan froze, legs heavy with a fear he couldn't quite name. And then something impossible happened. Zeus, the oldest and largest of the pack, stepped forward. Not to attack, but to bow his head beneath her hand. Eyes soft, tail low, posture submissive. One by one, the others followed. The circle became a sanctuary, and Grace, the girl who hadn't spoken in over a year, stood at its center, calm as still water. Ethan exhaled, realizing he hadn't breathed for minutes. He remembered the first time he saw her 3 months ago. A quiet little thing with dark blonde hair and eyes too old for her age, peeking out from behind the curtains of the neighboring farmhouse. The Millers had just moved in then, Robert and Linda, grandparents taking in their granddaughter after the accident. The kind of accident people didn't talk about. An icy bridge. A car off the road. No survivors but her. And since that day, not a word. At first, Ethan kept his distance. He always did. People in town called him a recluse, a haunted man who preferred dogs to people. Maybe they were right. After his wife died, and after Max, his best friend, the German shepherd who carried him through endless sleepless nights after leaving the fire department, passed away at 13, the silence in the house had become unbearable. So Ethan filled it. One rescue became 2, then 5, then 14. Unwanted, misunderstood, aggressive, they said. But to him, they were family. He converted the barn into a heated kennel, fenced off training fields, and built a rhythm again. A purpose. Maybe it was the dogs who noticed Grace first. Luna lingering by the fence, ears alert. Apollo stretched by the far gate, tail thumping whenever her shadow passed. And Ethan began to catch glimpses, her small hand pressed against the glass, her eyes tracking every move. Then one morning, she appeared at the property line while he brushed Athena. He didn't speak, just gave a nod. She stepped forward, hesitant, hand out. Ethan whistled low. Apollo came to his side. Gentle, he said, to both of them. Apollo leaned in. Grace's tiny hand landed behind his ear. A single tear slid down her cheek. From that day on, she came often, never speaking, always watching. Ethan showed her the basics, how to hold the leash, how to signal a sit, how to feed without sparking competition. She soaked it up like sunlight through cold glass. He never pushed, never asked about the accident. They had unspoken rules, the both of them. Then one night, Linda called. Grace had whispered in her sleep, just one word. Luna. Her first word in over a year. Ethan didn't ask what it meant, but he slept better that night than he had in months. What none of them knew was that Grace had been visiting at night. After her grandparents fell asleep, she'd slip through the tree line and sit by the fence, watching under the moonlight, bringing treats, mimicking Ethan's training, practicing hand signals. Somehow, without anyone realizing, she had taught them more than even Ethan had. And so, that morning, when he stepped into the circle and placed his hand on Zeus's collar, Grace finally looked up at him. Her lips didn't move, but her eyes said everything. And in that instant, Ethan understood. These dogs weren't just saving him anymore. They were saving her, too. That evening, the town hall was louder than usual. Inside the old cafeteria, now the town's meeting place, every seat was filled. People lined the walls, faces stiff with concern. No storm rumbled above Grace Hill, but one was brewing inside. At the center of it all stood Ethan Brooks and his 14 German Shepherds. 14 large breed dogs. Rachel Simmons's voice cut sharp as broken glass. That's not a household. That's a kennel. What happens if one gate is left open? What happens when a child wanders too close? Ethan sat in the back row, arms crossed, face unreadable. He had heard it all before. But tonight, the words struck deeper. His dogs weren't just animals. They were family, lifelines. He glanced at the photo tucked inside his pocket. Max, his first rescue, the one who saved him from silence after the fire that stole his wife. Mayor Charles Avery cleared his throat, glasses sliding down his nose. We're proposing an ordinance, he said, limiting residential properties to no more than 3 dogs. Current owners will have 90 days to comply. The silence that followed was heavier than any bark or growl. Ethan didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He simply stood, walked out before the vote, his back straight, even as the weight on his shoulders pressed him down. Later that night, the silence broke with a fit of coughing so sharp he dropped the water glass in his hand. The shatter echoed through the farmhouse, followed by the rush of paws on wood. Zeus was first, then Luna. The others gathered close, circling him, watching, concerned, as if they knew something was wrong. At the clinic the next day, Dr. Elena Ramirez studied him with a furrowed brow. I'm ordering a chest scan, Ethan. You're not bouncing back like you usually do. He only nodded. No protest. No questions. Deep down, he already knew. The heaviness in his chest wasn't just grief. It was something darker. Something growing. Meanwhile, across the property line, Grace was changing. She still hadn't spoken a full sentence in more than a year, but she was speaking in other ways. Communicating. Each night, when her grandparents thought she was asleep, she slipped out the back porch with her notebook clutched tight and crept to the fence. What started as quiet watching had become full-fledged training. By moonlight, she worked with the dogs, first one, then pairs, then whole formations. She mimicked Ethan's gestures, then invented her own. A flick of her wrist meant sit. A circling finger meant group formation. Page after page of her notebook filled with commands, observations, names. And the dogs responded, not only with obedience, but with loyalty. Athena nudged Grace's hand with her nose when she looked tired. Apollo guarded the trail she took from the Richardson house to the kennels. One morning, Janet Hargrove from the animal shelter dropped by with supplies and noticed something unusual. You've been working them in new drills? She asked, surprised at the dog's sharp responses to signals Ethan hadn't taught. Ethan shook his head, puzzled. Not me. After that, he started paying closer attention. Footprints by the kennels. A candy wrapper near the gate. The faint scent of strawberry shampoo in the hay. He had his suspicions, but part of him didn't want to know. If the girl was healing, wasn't that enough? Then came the visit he had dreaded. CPS. Agent Dana Fuller stepped out of her sedan, clipboard in hand, her voice clipped, professional. We've received concerns about a child being regularly exposed to a large number of unregistered dogs. I'm here to assess the environment. Ethan said nothing, just gave her the tour. Reinforced gates, clean kennels, feeding logs in order. She noted everything, her eyes skeptical. These dogs aren't just rescues. They're trained, she admitted. But that doesn't change the risk. For a child who's been through trauma, this is not a conventional therapeutic setting. Still, Ethan didn't argue. He only pointed toward the framed photo by the kitchen window. A little girl drawing beside Athena, with Luna lying protectively at her side. A moment caught in time, a bond unspoken. Dana's expression softened, but only a little. That night, Grace didn't come to the fence. Ethan noticed. He waited under the porch, light long past midnight. Apollo paced. Zeus whimpered. But Grace never arrived. Instead, she sat at her desk, pen trembling on paper. "They're going to take them away," she wrote, tears blurring the words. "I have to show them before it's too late." Over the next week, she doubled her secret training, sharpened her signals, timed her drills, taught the dogs to move as one. Even the older shepherds responded, picking up on the urgency in every flick of her hand, every step, every breath. Across the property, Ethan's cough grew worse. He masked it with coffee, with lozenges, with silence. Weakness wasn't an option. Not now. Janet stopped by again. "You look pale, Ethan." "Just tired," he lied. On the 60th day of the ordnance countdown, the letter arrived. Final inspection. 2 weeks. If he couldn't rehome 11 of his dogs, they'd be taken by force. That night, he sat on the porch, 14 pairs of eyes fixed on him, the quiet thicker than ever. "I can't lose you too," he whispered, barely audible. "Not like everything else." Inside her room, a little girl who had already lost everything studied her flashlight-lit plans, hand-drawn, smudged with determination. And in the barn, 14 dogs waited. Something was coming, and this time silence would not win. The morning sun bathed Grace Hill in gold, but Ethan felt none of its warmth. His breath came shorter now, the pain in his chest a constant weight. Still, he carried on morning chores, every step steady, 14 German shepherds moving with him like soldiers in formation. He didn't know how many more mornings he had left, only that it would never be enough. Across the line, Grace Miller sat at her breakfast table, backpack already strapped on. She watched the clock tick, every second a reminder of the plan she had been rehearsing for weeks. Her grandparents thought she was going to school, but today she had another mission. The moment their car disappeared down the street, Grace slipped out the back door, cutting through the woods she knew like her own heartbeat. At Ethan's, the town council, the mayor, and Agent Dana Fuller were already arriving for the inspection. This was it. The last chance. Ethan was showing Mayor Avery the new soundproofing in the barn when it hit him. That chill. That electric sense something was wrong. Janet noticed it too, following his gaze to the far field. And there she was. Grace. Ethan's voice cracked. The little girl was already inside the exercise yard. The gate, usually locked tight with a heavy padlock, now stood open. Inside the yard, 14 German shepherds had turned to face her. Their ears perked, bodies taut with focus, yet not one of them moved. Time itself seemed to stall. Someone called the Richardsons. Janet shouted, her voice sharp as she grabbed for her phone. "Keep everyone back." But Ethan's voice cut through, hoarse and breaking. "No." He was already stumbling toward the field, every step heavy. She's not supposed to be, and yet Grace wasn't trembling. She wasn't afraid. In the middle of the grass, her small frame stood straight, her chin lifted, her right hand raised. One sharp flick of her wrist, and the impossible happened. 14 massive dogs shifted as one. They moved into formation, circling her in perfect unison, their bodies low, eyes scanning outward. It wasn't aggression. It was protection. A living perimeter. What the hell? Officer Marcus Lee muttered, stepping forward before Janet caught his arm. "Wait," she whispered, her eyes locked on Grace. "Just wait." Another signal, silent, precise. A step forward, 2 fingers pointed to the ground. Instantly, the pack obeyed. First to a sit, then lower, pressing flat to the earth in total submission. The stillness was breathtaking. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Phones came out. Cameras captured every second. Ethan froze mid-stride, his breath ragged, his chest heavy. He hadn't trained them for this. Not this kind of coordination. Not this absolute response to her. Grace raised her hand again, this time directing Apollo forward. The great shepherd obeyed gently, lowering his head and taking a treat from her palm. "She's been working with them," Ethan whispered, stunned. All this time, but the words were cut short. A sharp pain ripped through his chest, sudden and brutal. Ethan staggered, gasped, and collapsed to his knees. His vision blurred. The last thing he saw was Grace spinning toward him, her mouth opening, and for the first time in over a year, sound poured out. "Stop," she cried, her voice breaking the silence. "They're helping him." The crowd fell into shocked stillness. Zeus, the largest of the pack, broke formation and charged, not in panic, but with purpose. He pressed his weight onto Ethan's chest in steady, rhythmic bursts, exactly where Ethan had taught during rescue drills. Luna sprinted toward the house, vanishing through the dog door. Seconds later, Janet dropped to her knees beside Ethan, her hands trembling as Luna returned, delivering a small bottle of nitroglycerin between her careful teeth. Janet's voice shook. How did she knows," Grace interrupted, her voice firm now. "I taught her." Janet's eyes widened. You taught her?" "I taught them all," Grace said, her notebook clutched to her chest. "At night, they're mine too." Agent Dana Fuller lowered her clipboard, her face pale with disbelief. "This isn't danger," she murmured. This is training like I've never seen. Like a tactical unit." Paramedics rushed into a scene that defied reason. A girl commanding with confidence. A pack of German shepherds executing rescue drills with precision. A man clinging to life in their care. Ethan drifted in and out of consciousness. The world around him blurred, Grace's voice, Zeus's weight pressing rhythmically on his chest, oxygen against his face. He wanted to speak, to tell them it was okay, to tell her she had saved him, that they all had. But the darkness pulled harder. As he was lifted into the ambulance, Ethan's eyes flickered open one last time. Through the glass, he caught a final glimpse, Grace standing tall, her face calm, her hands steady. Behind her, the 14 shepherds sat in perfect formation, guardians of both girl and promise. She raised her hand in a silent salute. And in that moment, Ethan knew he wasn't leaving them alone. He had kept his promise. The quiet beep of hospital monitors filled the sterile room. Tubes carried oxygen beneath his nose, and the ache in his chest had dulled into a relentless throb. But when Ethan opened his eyes, it wasn't the machines he noticed. It was Grace. She sat beside his bed, her notebook open, pages filled with sketches, hand signals, and training notes. Her small hand slipped into his, steady despite her years. "You kept your promise," she whispered. Ethan blinked slowly. He remembered those words, spoken years ago on a snowy roadside as he knelt beside a mangled car. A dying woman's voice in the chaos. Her plea. His vow. And now, her daughter was sitting at his side. Later that afternoon, Martha Miller quietly tidied the bedside table. As she moved Ethan's wallet, a faded photograph slipped out. She froze. Ethan, in his fire department uniform, stood beside a younger couple holding a toddler. Her voice trembled. "Robert," she whispered, recognizing her son. Her hands shook as she turned the photo over. Robert, Sarah, and Grace. Send off 2018. Captain E. Brooks. Martha sank into a chair, breath caught in her throat. The truth settled like stone. Ethan had known. Ethan had been there. When Howard arrived, she handed him the photo. "He knew them," she said, her voice breaking. He was Robert's captain. That night, when Martha showed Ethan the photograph, he didn't deny it. His eyes filled with quiet grief. He reached for a pen, his hand trembling as he scrawled words on a notepad. "I was first on the scene. I tried to save them. Couldn't save Robert. Sarah made me promise I'd watch over Grace." Martha pressed her hand to her lips, tears spilling freely. "You carried that alone? All this time?" Ethan nodded. "I bought the land here when I heard you were moving in. I just needed to be close." The truth cracked something open. That evening, Grace returned with Janet and Agent Dana Fuller. Janet had taken over care of the dogs, while Dana, once skeptical, even hostile, now stood humbled by what she had seen. Martha handed Grace the photo. "Sweetheart, this was taken before the accident. Do you remember?" Grace studied the picture in silence. Her finger traced her parents' faces. Then she moved to Ethan's. "That's you," she said softly. "I saw you that night." Ethan's breath caught. You remember? Grace nodded. You talked to my mom. You said, I'll watch over her. The room fell silent. That's why the dogs listen to me, Grace continued, her voice certain. She closed her notebook, hugging it to her chest. It's not just training. It's because they know we belong together. Dana eased into her chair, her voice softer now. Grace, why didn't you tell anyone before? The girl gave a small shrug. I didn't remember. Not until I met the dogs. They brought it back. Janet stepped forward, her words careful, measured. Agent Fuller, you've seen it yourself. How she communicates with them, how they respond. In 30 years of animal rescue, I've never witnessed anything like this. Dana folded her hands together, her tone heavy with thought. And in all my years, I've never filed a report like the one I'm about to submit. But I'll say this, removing her from that environment would do more harm than good. At Ethan's bedside, Martha squeezed his hand, her voice breaking with both relief and love. You didn't fail, Ethan. You honored that promise. And you brought our Grace back to us. Days later, the town gathered again. But this meeting was nothing like the last. The air was different, softer, full of hope. Footage of Grace's silent demonstration had spread far beyond their small community, rippling across the nation. Media vans lined the streets, but what mattered most was the way hearts and minds were shifting. Officer Marcus Lee rose first, his voice steady. We thought we were dealing with a public safety issue, but what I saw that day wasn't danger. It was discipline, love, and healing. Even Rachel Simmons, the council's harshest critic, stood to admit what no one expected. I was wrong. I judged based on fear. Mayor Avery nodded gravely, the weight of the moment settling over the room. The council will revise the ordinance. The dogs stay. Back at the hospital, Janet delivered the news with a smile that lit the room. Ethan, pale but proud, lifted his notepad with trembling hands and scrawled the words. They're not just dogs. They're her future. Maybe ours too. Spring wrapped Grace Hill in soft greens and golden light on the morning Ethan Brooks finally came home. The town had rallied together. Ramps built to his porch, a hospital bed set in his front room, a schedule of volunteers to keep him comfortable. His body was frail, the oxygen tank never far, but when he saw the dogs waiting at the gate in solemn formation, their tails wagging gently, his eyes shone. Grace stood among them, clipboard in hand, already directing the routine. Welcome home, Mr. Brooks, she said with a proud little smile. Ethan rasped, his voice thin but teasing. You running the show now? Grace nodded, her eyes steady. Just keeping your pack sharp, sir. And so life settled into a new rhythm. Strange, but beautiful. Grace came each day after school, filling pages of her notebook with training progress, medication notes, and new drills. She'd even given it a name, the Guardian's Code. One warm evening, Mayor Avery stopped by carrying a gift. A handmade wooden sign, the letters carved in gold. With Janet, Martha, and Officer Lee beside him, he mounted it proudly to the fence by the main gate, in honor of Ethan Brooks and the family he built. Grace traced the letters with her fingertips, whispering softly, I love it. And so will the dogs. Seasons turned. Summer gave way to fall. Ethan's body grew weaker, but his spirit lighter. Every evening, he'd sit wrapped in a blanket on the porch, Apollo at his feet, Grace at his side, sometimes reading from her notebook, sometimes just talking about new techniques she wanted to try. One evening, Martha found him gazing at the horizon. His voice was faint, but steady. I'm not scared. You should be, she whispered back, tears in her eyes. But Ethan only smiled. I've seen the worst the world can give. But this town, this girl, these dogs, they've given me something better than a second chance. They've given me peace. On his final night, he asked Grace to come early. She found him resting in his chair. The dogs gathered close, their bodies still, their eyes soft, like sentinels keeping watch. I've got something for you, Ethan said, pressing a sealed envelope into her hand. Don't open it yet. Wait until I'm gone. Grace's eyes brimmed with tears. I don't want you to go. I know, kiddo, he said gently, but I kept my promise. Now it's your turn. The next morning, Ethan Brooks slipped away in his sleep. When Grace entered the room, the dogs were already there, sitting in a perfect circle around him, as if they knew. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope. Inside, a letter written in Ethan's uneven scrawl. Grace, I see now that the promise I made to your mother wasn't just about keeping you safe. It was about helping you find your voice, your strength, and you've done that and more. You've given purpose to me, to these dogs, and to this town. Don't stop. Keep training. Keep healing. Build that place you dream about. Call it whatever you want, but make sure kids like you know they're not alone. You're not part of the pack anymore. You're the leader. With love, Ethan. 1 year later, the old barn had been reborn. A new sign gleamed above its doors. Animal therapy and healing for kids in memory of Ethan Brooks. He kept his promise. Inside, laughter filled the air. Children played with the dogs, some hesitant at first, others bursting with joy. Grace, now 10, stood at the front of the group, her voice strong, her eyes shining. Today, we're learning how to build trust, just like Ethan taught me. Outside, the 14 shepherds, older now, wiser, rested in the sun, always watching, always guarding. As the sun set behind Grace Hill, painting the Legacy Center in gold, Grace stood at the gate with Luna by her side. She looked out at the town that had once feared them, now united by love, by loyalty, by a promise that had been kept. What began in silence had grown into a symphony of second chances. Ethan may have been gone, but his legacy lived on, in every paw print across the yard, in every child learning to trust again, and in the voice Grace now carried with pride. If this story touched your heart, give it a thumbs up. Share your thoughts or your own story of healing in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, so you never miss another story of hope, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. This is Guardians of Grace Hill, where love leaves paw prints that never fade.